Hello, and welcome to Rallying for Rail. I wanted to talk about the reasons that I believe exist for America not having a great passenger rail system. My last video talked about how a lot of Amtrak's woes can be blamed on freight rail. And there is a lot that, indeed, can be blamed on freight rail. As to why that's the case? Well, you'll need to listen to my previous video, which I'll hopefully remember to link in the video description below. But there's another problem that Amtrak has, in my opinion. A funding problem. As in, an Amtrak doesn't get enough government funding problem. Here's something for scale. Amtrak said in a press release from a couple years ago that their total spend for capital projects in a recent fiscal year 2022, was $2.3 billion. For scale, the capital budget amount touted for Washington's metro system in their recent budget was, drumrolls please, $2.3 billion. So basically, the total spend for all of Amtrak's capital projects is about as much as one metro area spending on its transit system's capital projects. And at that, a metro system that, while large, isn't the largest in the United States. President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law is going to give Amtrak $22 billion in direct funding overall to Amtrak. That's better than $2.3 billion. But when you consider the fact that Sweden, with a much lower population than the United States and a lower population density than the United States, is in the midst of spending over $87 billion on their rail infrastructure, it's still comparatively pathetic. And it's also pathetic when compared to highways, which the government spent $52 billion on in 2022 alone, according to the Congressional Budget Office. No wonder highways are king in the United States. At this point of the video, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, so I know that Amtrak doesn't get tons of funding, but what's your point? And why is it important that Amtrak gets more funding? To put it simply, for Amtrak to become a genuinely good passenger rail system, it needs the money to make this possible. It costs $1 million to $3 million per mile to build tracks, according to statistics I've read. At that price range, for the 97% of the 21,400 miles Amtrak operates on to be converted from using freight rail tracks to having dedicated Amtrak tracks, it could cost up to $62 billion just to build those tracks alone. And that's before the many billions of dollars required to acquire land needed to build said tracks. Build tracks going to cities Amtrak should go to but isn't going to, build stations in cities that deserve passenger rail stations, and get the trains needed to provide new service as well as provide more frequent service on the lines it currently has. I don't have exact figures, but for the United States to have anywhere close to the system it should have, for the population as well as the population density it has, my guess is that hundreds of billions of dollars needs to be spent. And if that dollar figure scares you, I understand. I deal with sticker shock too. But it's actually not outrageous when you compare it to the cost of building a world-class highway system, which the United States did build from the 1950s through to the 1970s and 80s. In 1955, the estimated cost for building the highway system was $27 billion. That is about $317 billion in 2024 dollars when you account for inflation. So when you have this context, my saying that it probably would take hundreds of billions of dollars for the United States to build the sort of passenger rail system it deserves perhaps sounds less outrageous. But alas, that hundreds of billions of dollars is not coming. We're getting $22 billion by way of Biden's infrastructure plan, which I sense is more than what Amtrak has gotten in the past. I'm grateful for that progress. And I also recognize that this may be the most we can get right now politically, because there are some politicians who believe that Amtrak is a wasteful money pit. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that $22 billion is nowhere near enough for Amtrak to become the system it should become, based on the numbers I've crunched and the guesstimates I've made. Because of that, many of my future videos on this channel, which will brainstorm ideas of how to bring new Amtrak lines, as well as how to connect cities and towns to Amtrak lines, will indeed be based on Amtrak having funding it currently doesn't have. But I'll allow myself to dream anyway. Dream of a day when Amtrak gets the funding it needs to build a passenger rail system Americans can be proud of. So, do you have any thoughts about Amtrak's funding levels? If so, please leave a comment. I also welcome likes as well as subscriptions to my channel. Thank you and have a good day.